Hello, everyone. I am Anne Kampf, your host today, and I am happy to have you here for the second session of my six-part LinkedIn Live series, a space created to inspire learning, connection, and growth. In today's session, we are not here to talk about what's broken. We are here to explore what's working, real examples of teams, systems, and leaders who've brought people and processes in sync. We'll look at how D&I and operational excellence reinforce each other, why cultural alignment is key in complex, high-pressure operations like SIMOPS, environments where multiple operations run simultaneously and success depends on precision, coordination, and trust. And we'll discuss also about what role do middle managers play as the bridge between inclusion, performance, and trust. I'm really grateful to have two brilliant guests today who bring both the human and operational perspective of excellence. Oana Iordachescu, a leading D&I strategist and founder of Fair Cultures, curator of the Fair Annual Workplace Inclusion Conference in Barcelona. She's led global D&I and inclusive hiring strategies for Facebook, Booking.com, Wayfair, and Criteo, and co-founded a deep tech recruitment agency. Oana has worked across 6 countries, turning workplace inclusion into measurable business impact. She's also an executive alumna of Yale, Wharton, and a regular speaker at MWC, Women Tech Global, and UAB. Welcome, Oana.
Hello, Anne. Hello, everybody who's joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here.
And my second guest, Joseph Paris Jr., author of State of Readiness and a globally recognized leader in operational excellence. He's the founder of the XONITEK group of companies celebrating its 40th anniversary, as well as the Operational Excellence Society and Readiness Institute. Joseph also produces the Operational Excellence by Design newsletter and podcasts, and is recognized among the top 50 global thought leaders in OPEX and design thinking. Welcome, Joseph. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it a great deal.
Let's start by grounding ourselves in definitions, because I'm a very structured person, or at least I like to think that about me. These terms, operational excellence and D&I, often get used interchangeably with other concepts, but they mean something distinct. Joseph, if you allow me, I would like to start with you. How do you define operational excellence, and how is it different from operational efficiency, a term we hear just as often, but which means something quite differently?
So, to me, operational excellence, and I have a formal definition that I won't bore you with, but to me, operational excellence is getting an organization to operate as an organization, not just swim lanes or functional silos or business units, but the entirety of the organization. And if you envision, for instance, a team, whether it's an American football team or a soccer/European football team, when a team is working at peak efficiency, they are not throwing the ball or kicking the ball to where the person is. They're throwing it to where the person should be. You know what I mean? They're working in an anticipatory fashion, and they're also able, based on their capabilities and capacity, to react to changes in either the marketplace or in the strategy that's on the pitch. So, to distill it out, to me, operational excellence is an organization working as a high-performance organization.
That clarity is very important. Thank you. Oana, how about D&I? How do you define in your work, and how does it connect to operational excellence, especially in environments where people and processes must work in sync?
I think just to tie into Joseph's piece there, right? The idea of people being there, first of all, in the team for each other, being receptive to when that ball comes. But just kind of taking it a step back, just break it down. I think your audience might be from diverse backgrounds and industries and sectors. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what we need to think is diverse representation. We work in global organizations a lot. We need to kind of see that representation showing up in all our layers in an organization, especially in critical areas in decision making. We're talking about equity, which is fair opportunity, access to opportunity, whether that is how do I grow and learn in this organization? How do I promote? How do I achieve, let's say, my maximum potential without being hindered by anything that is identity related, for example, or background related? And of course, the third part is inclusive culture. I think here is very interesting for us to think more. This is a bit what we preach, the designing of an inclusive system. And here we are very much related to the daily operations, where diversity can become a bit of a strength, where equity is the standard and we don't have favorites and preferential treatment for certain groups, and inclusion is really the way the work gets done because everybody gets to contribute. So I'll leave it here. This is a little bit how I look at this particular framework, but of course, contextually, we can nibble in it now.
Thank you. Well, alignment isn't just technical, it's emotional and cultural, which takes us perfectly into our next topic, inclusion under pressure. Uh, Simultaneous operations or parallel operations are some of the most complex work environments out there. They demand timing, precision, and absolute trust. The question is addressed to both of you. How can inclusion actually improve coordination and decision making in such high pressure settings? And if you have examples based on your experience where this was applied and it worked.
You want to go
Joseph?
first? Okay, I'll go. It's interesting we start with inclusion. I was speaking with a gentleman by the name of Billy Ray Taylor, and he was the senior vice president at Goodyear, responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he was on my podcast, and we were chatting about it. And it got to the part about inclusion. And he made mention that it's not enough to have a diverse team or diverse leadership group. You have to include them. You actually have to use them. And this is the part I didn't get. And I didn't get because it would never cross my mind. I own a smallish consultancy. It's a boutique consultancy, however many employees I have. And it would never cross my mind to have somebody on my team that I would not include. Because everybody that I hire, everybody that's on the team has a purpose and they're fulfilling that purpose. So to just have somebody available and not include them would just is a foreign concept to me. So I could see how in other organizations and larger organizations, people could get hidden in the shadows or lost in the cracks. And I think sometimes they have to be like the Who's in Horton Hears a Who. You have to, we are here, we are here, we are here. If you're an introvert, you might not be included, not on purpose, but inadvertently because you don't raise your hand or step forward.
Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned their alignment, and I think this alignment comes really from a gap, right, between what's the intention when we work together, operationalize, have processes put in place, and the actual execution, right?
Correct.
And for me, somehow, I think to your point, Joseph, there, when we talk with the clients that we work with, they start feeling it around the 200, 300 people mark. Because that's when, as you say, people either fall through the cracks or the differences between the way we communicate or collaborate can be more obvious. Communication is a bit more strained, right? And we see specifically just in the workflow design of certain specific operations. Think about it. How do we do shift planning, for example? How do we do remote work policies? We have people who have caregiving responsibilities. Sometimes they are penalized, right? If they don't hold up to certain programs or intensity of work. There is rigidity and there is flexibility. So it's specifically when I think about operations and like high intensity, high pressure, there's always somebody that maybe suffers a bit more than another group, another category. Also here, I worked a lot with like the Zalandos and the Wayfair, which have a lot of warehouses, right? So you need to think here that there is a lot of accessibility options that you need to think in order for people to be able to work in this type of environments. And again, this is where inclusion comes into the conversation for operations. We have modified a lot of these warehouses to have a lot of auditory or visual signaling so that people with hearing impairment or visual impairment can react to the same type of environment and do their work in the same way as somebody who doesn't have those impairments. So it definitely comes in together, but for me, it's very important to try to operationalize inclusion, really understand where are the biggest critical needs and offer that level of accessibility and inclusion, real inclusion, let's say. So not just in the mottos and the values on the wall.
Right.
Yeah, to walk also the talk. Wana, what cultural blind spots have you seen appear when multiple teams work side by side under stress?
Ooh, a lot. I think there is the first big one that I got the chance to dismantle. I think this is my most important achievement, where DEI is not necessarily just a moral imperative, as any ChatGPT will tell you now, right? And it's been overused in any career website. It's not just a PR exercise. It's not just kind of performative, but there is proof in people considering this view of, hey, if people are diverse, we need to also think, how do we facilitate them being at their best at any point in time in these roles in this company. So for us, at the end of the day, it's around business performance. So a lot of these misconceptions are around this, that DEI has nothing to do with business performance. It actually has quite a lot. Inclusion is an operational lever at the end of the day. So first of all, when people are feeling safe to speak up, that is inclusion, and that is something that operationally you need, because if something is going wrong and people do not dare to tell you, then most likely you will be in trouble. When you have processes that are transparent, when the teams are diverse in thinking, we see faster and better problem solving, especially for critical and high impact areas. We also can think of more like specific areas, right? Like you work a lot in this dangerous environment, right? If we're thinking about oil and gas, refineries, and all these things, anything related to manufacturing, logistics, like heavy stuff of operations, you can reduce a lot of your safety incidents. So a lot of these misconceptions come from the idea that, for example, cultural differences do not exist. If we have a code of conduct and a way to communicate at X company, everybody will follow exactly that guideline. That is not true. We come with different ways of communicating and problem solving. And the best companies I've seen out there, they blend it. They nurture, they have a foundation for how the organization operates, but then they also teach their managers and specifically their leadership on how to operate in different markets with different demographics, and really kind of blending those together and making it a workflow, not just an effort all the time. So yeah, I've made it a bit longer, but DEI is
No.
a business performance piece. So
Thank
that's
you. No, based on what you said, I would like to address now Joseph a question from your OPEX lens. How can leaders maintain psychological safety and inclusivity when speed and compliance dominate?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. The first, we have to understand that there's the written or spoken culture and the real culture. And oftentimes people will, put words on a wall or speak the words, but they don't live the words. So that's a huge problem first and foremost. They might say, it's safe to speak, but when somebody speaks, it's not. So for instance, safety is everybody talks about safety being number one, the first. And there was a conference I was at, in fact, where the person was talking about the corporate values, and safety was the last on the list. But when he got to it, he said, and at our company, safety comes first. And me, being myself, said, well, if safety comes first at your company, why is it listed last? So everybody talks about it, but when they hit that red button, nobody wants to hit the red button and stop production. Okay, because they know that they're going to be called to the management. They're going to have to answer for it. They're not going to be celebrated, even though the company might say, we will celebrate you for identifying a safety risk and hitting that red button. They are never celebrated. Okay, so this is to me is a turning point when somebody actually hits the red button, stops the line, and in fact they are celebrated instead of chastised or challenged. That is a turning point to me. So when we think about psychological safety, we talk about the opportunity to express themselves. We have to understand what the difference between what we intend or what we hope and what the reality is. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, I have a client that had or has suffered this or is suffering this still. They had a leader that was autocratic, very autocratic for 10 or 15 years. The person did not allow anybody to make a decision, took all the glory and deferred all the blame. And eventually that person left, and a new, one of my favorite CEOs is now on board and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. And his challenge, and as he's expressed to me, his challenge is that people don't believe in the new way. Mm. They're used to 10 or 15 years under the autocratic leader, and they don't believe that a different way can exist. And they're always looking for an opportunity to say, see, things haven't changed. And they amplify a little thing to project back to the past. So my guidance to him was, you have to be the water on the rock. The rock will succumb to the water, but it's going to take constant time and pressure, a lot of time and constant pressure to wear down that rock. And eventually, the people will change, hopefully. He does not have that problem with the new hires. The people that he's hired under his tenure, he doesn't have that challenge with. So when we're looking at the human dynamic, we have to make sure that if we're going to establish or say that we've established a safe place, it's got to be genuinely a safe place. People have to be encouraged to push the red button, share their ideas, debate, not argue.
Thank you. I mean, I think that the ones that can really support the change in culture are the middle managers, because they run the culture. They are often the unsung heroes, or sometimes the bottleneck in turning strategy into behavior. And I'd like to ask both of you, what does the phrase that I just said mean to you in practice?
Makes me think of Beyonce with Girls Run the World, but this is the manager piece. I mean, I think we've all witnessed good managers, bad managers, right? We've all had the experience of what a great manager can do in a team, in an organization, and really be a force multiplier. And we've also witnessed when managers are just not ready to fight for their teams, to really think for their teams, and then maybe they're a bit single-minded or coming from maybe, as Joseph was giving the example of this kind of autocratic type of leadership. So for me, it's a little bit that having a growth mindset for managers means that your teams and your organization will actually have the chance to grow. Basically counting on them and teaching them and educating them and being with them when they need you as an organization, as a leadership, is proving to be quite critical. So this is a bit what I see there.
Thank you.
To me, I believe that middle management is actually the owner of the culture. Senior leadership comes and goes. And whenever a new leader comes in, a new CEO, CFO, COO, any of the C-suite, any of the senior vice presidents, these people have a tendency to come in to a role and then move out, either out of the company or into a different role. But what is a constant is this middle management. And they're the ones that actually own the culture. They usually come up from underneath, from entry level, and they get promoted and graduated. And whatever that culture is when they're first hired, that's what they carry forward. So we have to understand that in order to change the culture of an organization, we have to concentrate on the middle management and get them to buy in. And the challenge there is that they are set in their ways, and they have to be motivated, shown that a new way not only is existing, but it's going to exist for a while, because they're going to put their beliefs on the line that a new way is going to be better. And the one thing that you could do to destroy a culture, or a culture change movement, if you will, is to set somebody up for failure, where they take that risk, they take that step, and next thing you know, the person is left, and that is the change agent, and they're left there by themselves. So, middle management, they're the ones that own the culture. In order to get a culture to change, and by the way, then we'd have to even talk about, why do we have to change a culture? People talk about culture change all the time. It's like, why do we have to change it? So anyway, if we're going to change the culture of a company, we have to make sure that we concentrate on that middle layer.
True. And I would also remind to our audience that if they have questions or comments, they are very welcome to write them in the LinkedIn post. We are able to see them and happy to answer. Oana, how can managers turn diversity, equity, and inclusion from a statement into visible daily actions? And if you could give us an example that succeeded.
In the work that we do, we focus on what I call moments that matter. So specifically, middle managers are very, very much responsible for hiring, right? They're even responsible for attracting talent in the market constantly by their professional brand, but also by their representing their organization. So specifically in this particular situations, they have such a big toolbox to, on one side, be sure together with their talent acquisition teams and HR teams that they're attracting people from diverse backgrounds, and they also do understand how to make fair decisions. We see a lot of bias, but we also see a lot of like blunt stereotyping and discrimination in some cases. I've worked with people who are in Lebanon, for example, and their job descriptions tell you very specifically which religion should you belong to if you want to access a certain job. So there are certain areas around the world that are having a long way to go to really talk about inclusion. But let's say in a more modern Western world, there's, let's say, at least a surface level lack of bias and lack of stereotyping. But once you go in there, once you go in the operation, once you need to make that decision between candidate 1 and 2 and 3, you will see that things do surface, and you will have people in your team that maybe you didn't know that they were homophobe until you brought somebody in the interview process that is part of the LGBTQ community, right? So this level of attention from middle managers is extremely important for them to dissect, where do I need to intervene, where do I need to grow and educate myself, and empower also the ones around me to take better decisions. So moments that matter, whether it's attraction, hiring, promotion, which type of grants or which type of development program should you grant, or how, right? And not necessarily bring your personal choice, but be very equitable and really challenge somehow. If you are in an ecosystem that is not at the moment equitable, you have a lot of opportunities as a middle manager to really intervene in these moments that matter and ensure inclusion and ensure equity.
Right. Joseph, you've warned against giving managers responsibility without authority. How do we empower them to lead both people and processes efficiently, effectively?
Okay, so the actual feeling that I have is that you've probably heard of the term being set up for failure.
Yeah.
So you're being set up for failure when you're given accountability and responsibility without authority. So if you're going to be measured on it and evaluated on it, but you have no ability to influence its outcome, you're being set up for failure. So when I'm working with a group, I want to make sure that, we talk about empowerment. We use this word quite a bit. I don't know if anybody actually knows what it means, but to me, it means that I'm engaging people as their peer. Okay, I'm being as empathetic as possible. I'm trying to understand that walking that mile in their shoes, and I want to make sure that they are truly empowered in order to be successful. One of the clients that I'm working at recently, we have a stand-up meeting in the morning, and the shop foreman is telling everybody what he needs for them to produce that day. And I gave him the suggestion that instead of telling people what he needs from them today, turn it around and ask a question: how can I make you successful today? My assumption is that everybody understands what's in front of them. Everybody goes into their job knowing what they have to do today. And if not, there's various visual cues that will tell them. However, instead of creating a push by saying, this is what I need from you, create a pull. How can I help you be successful? And oftentimes it'll be, well, I have a break fix. I have a man out. I have some deficiency in my department that if I had this deficiency rectified, I could be more successful today. So I think that we have to just flip the script, instead of telling people, asking them. And I find that is very, very productive. It's very Socratic. If anybody's ever studied the Socratic method, I would encourage you to do it and stop telling and start asking.
Right. On the other hand, what are early warning signs that culture is breaking down in the middle layer? And how can we, catch them in time?
A level of disengagement. If you see somebody that is, got their hands in their pocket, looking at the floor, shrugging their shoulders, forward. I was at a client site in Florida once, and there was this gentleman. I could see that he was distraught, and it was visible. He was a big guy, okay, and he was walking around hunched over and just looked defeated. And so I went up to him and I said, Steve, what's the problem? And he says, he was put into this position of leadership and given no tools, no training. He was adrift. And worse, everybody started mocking him because he was a source of so much downstream failures that not only was he not being supported, but he was actively being mocked. So I took him out to lunch, and he says, I only have a 1 hour lunch. He said, Steve, today you have as long a lunch as we need in order to talk about it. And we sat down, and honest to God, as soon as we sat down, he was just like, bah! He was just like flooding me with everything that was, he wasn't angry. He was distraught. He was defeated. And I told him, I said, listen, Steve, this is what we're going to do. Every morning, the first person I'm going to come to is I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to see what you need in order to be successful today. And after lunch, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to see how you're doing and what we can do to tidy it up for the rest of the day. And after about 3 weeks of this, with very, very close support, we saw a turnaround. And you could see it just in the way he walked. He was walking much more straight. He was much more engaged. He had more confidence. And so I think that what we have to do as leaders is not just look at what is spoken, but look at what is unspoken. People will speak volumes just in the way they carry themselves. And I think that we have to be a little bit more cognizant of the way our colleagues and our employees and our families carry themselves.
Can I just to add, I think this is a great example, and also I'm glad to hear that those simple conversations, right? They have so much power to turn people around from disengaged and really kind of confused, right? I think this is what we're ending up with: confused people when that middle layer breaks down. What we also see is burnout disguised as high performance. We see a lot of the middle managers starting to do the work of the people that are under them because they just don't want them to fail, but they don't know how to kind of guide them. They're also trying to catch up on everything that leadership is doing, or not necessarily giving them straight up in terms of like information or decision making power, or empowerment, like Joseph was saying, right? So then they try to do too much, and what we see is layers and layers and layers of middle managers burned out, right? And sometimes, especially when we talk about women in these positions, there is a very specific critical aspect there why we don't see more women in top leadership, because they burn out at this level, because of they really kind of overactivate the empathy mode, they overactivate the let's be operational versus strategic. So there is a very, very kind of quick signal when you see this type of recurrent burnout or high performance, but not so much effectiveness, right, in movement, but without progress. That's where I would start to dig as well.
Let me riff off of that, if you don't mind. I believe that HR is not the strategic force it should be. What I see when people are hired, they're not given a career path, and they're not Sherpa'd. They're not supported along that career path. And what ends up happening is a person gets promoted, just like Steve was. Okay, they get promoted, and they're not equipped to take on that job.
Yep.
And the person that was above them has moved forward, but ends up being pulled back because the person that was promoted can't do their job. And by the way, this is a cascading effect. The person that got promoted didn't properly have the replacement onboarded. It's a whole life cycle. It's like, what do they need to be trained in? How are they being outfitted? What's their career path in the organization? How does HR best support them? And I agree with you that these people in the middle, they get stressed and they have the anxiety because they are promoted to a position to which they're ill prepared, and yet the replacement is also ill prepared. So you end up having to do or trying to do your new job as well as completing your old job. And I think that HR has to do a better job making that path more deliberate.
There is so much conversation, but I want to emphasize conversation.
Right? Yeah.
Around proper skills mapping against not a job but a career path.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very important shift that we need to go through, for sure.
Yeah.
True. And I think it has to be, as you said, Oana, not only conversation, but it has to be emphasized and reiterated and put more attention, right?
Of course.
On this. I'm coming back short to the SIMOPS. SIMOPS, simultaneous operation can be if you think at a construction site, if you think at a operating theater, if you think at, launching a program within a big corporation, again, where actions are developed in parallel from different people that maybe do not speak the same language. How can we, or how can the managers support those teams to be successful? Because in SIMOPS, there's always a little bit of stress. There can be the difference in communication coming from the fact that, for example, English is not their native language. Yeah, how can D&I and operational excellence support managers make those teams successful?
I can have a stab at this one because I've witnessed in multiple different formats the successful and the unsuccessful, and I think we have a bias for action, especially in operations, right? Move, solve, check, next, and especially when things are setting up. The successful organizations, they took more of an attitude around move slow to move fast. So move slow at the beginning, set the protocols because there will be protocols and people can learn those protocols. But they've also taken a lot of time in setting up two specific things. One was your regular day-to-day modus operandi around communication. And here, for those who study communication, but also in leadership and management, there are a lot of enablement courses, training, workshops around, for example, answer first communication, especially in crisis mode, like stop the context, let's see what the problem is, and if we have time, let's actually go into the context. And this is very different, for culturally very different. So in, for example, Eastern Europe or East Asia, you will see more this low context, this a lot of like details first and then kind of giving the problem. In the UK or American, German, Dutch, you will see the vice versa. There is a pyramid model. So people actually take the time to teach their teams these different models. So then you can adjust and adapt and use what is most useful in specific situations. So communication, day-to-day communication. And the second piece of what they really move slow on, making sure everybody gets it and agrees on and follows, is decision making. And here, of course, we see a lot of challenges around hierarchy. You will see cultures that are very hierarchical, and until the big boss of the certain side didn't say go or stay, nothing moves, right? No matter how intelligent and informed those conversations are. And in some other cultures, they're like, well, we'll do it and we'll ask forgiveness for it later once we figure it out. So even just understanding that cultural background of our teams will help you deblock things. So those two branches, I around like moving slow on fixing them, and then it runs. Then then the flywheel happens.
It's funny that you mentioned some of those things. First off, my youngest son wanted to buy a car during COVID. And I'm like, why do you want to buy a car? You don't have a job, you don't have school, you're trapped at the house. I mean, why do you want to buy a car? And I thought I'd convinced him that of the wisdom of delaying. And so I get home after a business trip and walk into the door, and I say to my wife, whose car is that in the driveway? And of course, she says, go speak to your younger son. And I go to him and I said, Anton, I thought we had to talk. I thought you were going to wait. And he looked at me and he said, you always say it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission. Now, mind you, this is a lifelong mantra of mine, a core mantra of mine. I'm always begging forgiveness rather than asking permission. And ironically, he bought a 2-seater Roadster Miata or MX-5. And I did the same thing, exact same thing when I was living with my parents a decade before, and I bought an MGB. So it goes to show that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. But that being said, now I've lived in Germany for some time, and culture matters, okay? Americans are impetuous. We don't think things all the way through. I mean, that is our culture. We beg forgiveness all the time. We make decisions much more quickly. In Europe, I find that everybody is much more conservative. They will look at things each way from Sunday, and it drives me insane.
But don't tell them they're conservative. Tell them they're consensus driven.
Yeah.
Consensus driven. Yes, they are driven by consensus. And while they're driving for consensus, they're driving me mad. But this is what I have to downshift. Okay, to use an automobile metaphor, I have to downshift in order to make progress. And one of my good friends in the States has a saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Mm-hmm. So if we think about that, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, you could visualize how that can be. You know what I mean? Because smooth means that you have a predictable flow. And that predictable flow is what creates velocity. And I like velocity over speed because, for nerdy reasons. To me, velocity is speed with a vector, with purpose, with a direction. Speed is just like going around quickly. So those are some of the things that culturally you have to be cognizant of when you're from someplace working someplace else, or if you are looking around the table or your team and your team is from a variety of places. That person that might be quiet might be one that is looking for more consensus or being reserved. So I think what as leaders, what we have to do is understand that if we truly have a diverse organization, we have to be understanding of everybody else's engagement habits.
Mhm.
You know, what and how they engage. And some people, I want to just speak on decision making for a second, because we all talk about being data driven, right? We all want to be data driven organizations. And we get to the point where we think that data is making the decision for us, but it's not. So I'll give you a question. How much data do we have to collect and analyze in order to absolutely guarantee with certainty an outcome? So how much data do we have to collect and analyze in order to absolutely guarantee an outcome? And theoretically, it would be infinite amounts of data and infinite amounts of analysis of that data, right?
Right.
So who's got that kind of time? So how do we make a decision? And I would propose for your consideration that we make our decisions when our level of confidence exceeds our level of fear. Okay, so data goes a long way to building confidence. What about the confidence in our colleagues and our teammates? You know, do we have confidence in them? How about our organization? Do we have confidence in our organization or the extended value chain? So the more confidence in components of confidence that we can build, the more robust our decisions can be, and the more quickly we can make those decisions. But it really comes down to confidence when it's time to make a decision.
Right. Oana, you talked in your live sessions, which I followed, about moving from fit cultures to fair cultures. What's the mindset shift leaders need the most?
I mean, for a very, very long time, we established a box for every role, and we said this is the profile, and everybody needs to be 90% of that profile, and otherwise you don't get in there, right? And now we are working with maybe a couple of different philosophies, more hiring, promoting also for potential, really trying to assess how does that fit also to the idea that we deal with constant change. So once we've built that box, maybe in 6 months, that box is already obsolete, right? So
Mm.
those particular sets of skills, not necessarily they need to be thrown in the trash, but they need to be reutilized or repurposed. So there are some practical things, of course, when we talk about fair cultures, like really understanding your demographics, whether that is I'll give you an example. We work with a client who it's on the market for about 60 years, very kind of historical, rail related, and the leadership, the C level and the VP level is, let's say, 60 plus, right? But all the other layers, because it's a very kind of customer focused endeavor, everybody else, it's either in their 20s and most of the time non-national. So there is already a big clash between these particular two groups around like how do we work, how do we communicate, what do we prioritize. So the company is quite successful, but it actually became even more successful when s- it took a little bit of a break, and it analyzed these new demographics that entered the organizations, and they were doing the work in a very different way, but in a better way for their customers, for their users. So really understanding, yes, we're hiring for some skills and we're creating a certain group within our organization, but what do we do with that? We solve problems
Mm.
for our customers, we create value for our stakeholders, we probably impact the world in a different way now that we can harness those skills and those preferences. So just kind of thinking not or about the role, but about what do I do with these people longer term, and how can my organization offer them the best place possible to expand on their potential and impact what I need to impact, whether it's user, customers, planet, etc. Right? So there is a little bit of a fundamental shift, and like I need workforce, right? I
Yeah.
need resources, human resources. We are partners in this, right? We can create better and faster things together, but there needs to be understanding, there needs to be openness around like who are these people that are joining me on this journey and on this vision. And that's a longer conversation. Yes.
True. Joseph, how can we design standardized systems that still allow creativity and inclusion?
Okay. I don't believe in systems that are so standardized that they don't allow for flexibility. Okay. To me, an ideal system is going to be one that takes 80 or 90% of what it's expected and just puts it right down the chute, and it's unadulterated and it's untouched and it just starts at the beginning and ends at the end as intended. I think that also we have to have that flexibility to experiment in a controlled environment. And we also have the opportunity or need the opportunity to do the one-offs, as they make sense. So I'll give you an example. We were doing a conference room pilot on an ERP system some decades ago, early 2000s probably. And we had the order to cash process down to say 7 or 8 steps, something simple. And we're in the conference room pilot. So this is like, pretty much before we are modeling this in the system. And somebody brings up this oddity. And the oddity was going to add like 4 or 5 steps to every order. I'm like, this is impactful. Why are we hearing about this now? And the response was like, it doesn't happen that often. Well, how often is not too often? Well, 2 or 3 times a quarter. Now, I put my foot down. I said, listen, we are not going to add 4 or 5 steps to every order of your 700 orders that you do every day to accommodate something that may or may not happen 3 times a quarter. However, if it ever happens again, you're going to handle it outside the system like you always have. Because we don't want perfect, we want good. Okay? And sometimes you have to allow a little bit of flexibility in the system in order to accommodate those oddballs. But that means that 80% of your business is running more or less on autopilot. And now we could use our brains and handle the oddballs. And by the way, getting to the diversity side, because I've worked all over the world, people, their problem-solving skills, the way they approach a problem is very, very much based on how they grew up. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for instance, when I work in South Africa and a machine breaks down, they don't look for the part to get it back up and operational. It might take months for them to get it. So they're going to fix that machine with coat hanger wire, duct tape, and WD-40. They're going to get it up and operational. A German, that same machine breaks down. A German fixes it. 10,000 years from now, an archaeologist will find it. It'll still be working. Okay, Americans don't think things all the way through. We're a bit of an impetuous lot, and we're going to have a hybrid approach. But this is the actual strength of diversity, in my opinion. The strength of diversity is around the table. You have people from all over the world, all different experiences, and they're going to look at this challenge. If you have a diverse team, they're going to look at this challenge from the way they grew up solving problems. And the opportunity to get a very, very creative, innovative, and robust solution to that challenge, well, let's put it this way, it's probably more likely than not. And to me, that is the single biggest strength of diversity, is the variety of inputs you can get when faced with a challenge.
Very true. When you think about the future of work, because this is a very hot topic in our days, especially with technology evolving so fast, what role will, from your point of view, have human connection, or will human connection play in sustaining both diversity, equity, and inclusion and operational excellence?
You want to go first?
I mean, I come from this software engineering type of backgrounds that then impact the supply chain, impact everything around that, production, manufacturing. And it's very interesting because the dream of any engineer is automate everything. Don't have human interaction because human in the loop is a flaw in the loop. That's kind of the thinking of this engineering mastermind. And I think there is a point to that. The funny thing is that they actually need to work with other humans to create this full automation of the planet, right? But I would say that there is a certain gap at this point in understanding what does the future of work looks like across the world. And we will see phases and phases of this evolving. But if you're thinking maybe about your immediate, kind of environment, there there is probably even more need for people to connect and understand what they can and should solve together. Maybe that's also my biggest challenge now with the technological evolution that we're seeing, the boom. There's so much like, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do anything. And I'm like, yeah, but what should we do? What are the problems that we need to prioritize? And this is where humans coming together and taking these decisions are still worth it, because technically we do it for ourselves, right? For our customers, for ourselves, for our communities. So we are on a journey. It's a very fuzzy journey, in my opinion, now, but probably more than ever necessary to connect and debate and really analyze what's the value of what we're doing.
And for me, I look back on the internet, when the internet became the internet in the late 1990s. It was a gigantic paradigm shift. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. People were not talking about revenue and profitability; they're talking about eyeballs to their website. We're not making any money, but you should see the number of eyeballs to my website. And I was like, when I could pay for groceries with eyeballs to my website, then I'll believe in this new paradigm. But until that day comes, I'm not going to buy in. However, if you look at the compression of time, that we saw a transformation in the way people do business. I mean, it was very, very significant. And what I think is I think that technology accelerates and it leaves a certain group of people behind. And those people have to work to catch up or reinvent themselves. And I think that we're going to see the same thing with AI. AI is going to accelerate into the future, and there's going to be a group of people, that, whether it's programmers or lawyers or accountants, I'm going to say largely white-collared individuals that are going to be challenged. I read just recently that, Amazon's thinking about releasing 15,000 employees, all white-collar.
It has yesterday.
Yes. Okay. So it has yesterday. So, that's how soon I read it. And they will have to work to catch up. But I believe that it's setting up, and this is the human side, it's setting it up for the dreamers are going to be able to dream bigger and make their dreams real faster than given the tools that were available to them 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know who those dreamers are. It's going to be the ones that are bold. 80% of them will fail. But, out of the internet came YouTube, came Google, came Facebook, came, social media, came all of the different utilities that we're using to monitor production and finance around the world. That wouldn't have been possible without that big bang that was the internet. We're right at the very beginning of the big bang that is AI, and what it's going to look like on the other end is subject to prediction and speculation. But there's going to be a group of people that are going to hurt while they're trying to find their footing, because they're going to be left behind, and they'll have to just reinvent themselves like every paradigm shift in the past.
Mm-hmm. True. If you had to pick one common myth about, Joseph, in your case, operational excellence, Oana, in your case, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that still holds leader back, what would it be? And what's the truth behind it?
For operational excellence, it's fear. One thing that holds people back is fear. Fear of making a mistake, fear of the unknown. I spoke earlier about confidence, making our decisions when our level of confidence exceeds our level of fear. some people, whether it's the new hire or the middle manager or the senior leadership, they all are managed by fear. Am I going to make a mistake today? If I do, what's the impact? I mean, certainly we don't want to make a mistake that is going to threaten life and limb, but there's other types of mistakes, like I call them suboptimal outcomes. I don't like to say that somebody made a mistake. It was a suboptimal outcome. The key is to be able to have an environment where that's okay. And for it to be okay, if I make a decision that results in a suboptimal outcome, I have to feel free to raise my hand and say, I probably should have done something different. And the more power I have to raise that hand, the more transparent and more supportive my organization, the smaller the mistake is going to be. Because I made that mistake, I made that suboptimal outcome, and I could get resources on it to fix it. In many companies, I don't have that opportunity to say I need support, because you're going to be chastised. You're going to be looked down upon. Your annual review is probably going to reflect that you made the suboptimal outcome, not that you raised your hand and got it fixed. So I think that's what we have to work on as an organization if we're going to take us to a higher performing level.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't lead from fear.
Don't lead.
I think on this side, the myth of meritocracy, I would definitely challenge people to challenge any opinions they have about that. There is actually even a very, very good book with the same title. But meritocracy comes from a place of privilege, when you think that, oh yes, everybody will get what they work for. And when you are a leader in an organization, if you do pay attention, if you are an active listener, you will see that there are people missing from the decision-making table. You will see that there are people who are not utilized at all, or in their entirety, or for their potential. You will see that there are people left behind, and it's your job to fix that. It's your job to level the playing field. It's your job to kind of really understand. And to Joseph's point, data. We have so much data, so just use that data that you have, because we as leaders also get a lot of feedback, and I've seen people who choose not to listen to that feedback because we've been there, done that. I know everything. I've heard this before, but that's the real power in a leader, to listen and to respond as well. That's where the empowerment comes in for themselves. So don't take things for granted. We've done it like this. It will work further. The world is really changing fast. The generations that are coming behind us have their own particularities, their own dreams, their own ambitions, and just judging by what we've been taught in the previous years, or different philosophies of leadership might not work so well. So yeah, ignore that idea of meritocracy for the sake of meritocracy.
So if I could build a bridge between operational excellence and meritocracy, when it comes to annual reviews, and I coach people that are doing annual reviews, in my opinion, if a person didn't make a suboptimal outcome during the course of a year, I know only one of two things can be true. Either they weren't pushing themselves, or somebody else is getting the blame.
Right.
Okay. If you're driving value in your organization, you are going to make missteps. It's inevitable. And if you don't own it, if you don't learn from it, if you don't get other people to support you, then your value is going to be greatly diminished. But at the end of the year, when you're being evaluated, if you didn't make any mistakes, that only means you weren't pushing yourself hard enough, or within your organization, or somebody else is getting the blame, and neither of those is acceptable.
Right. We came to the end of the session. This was a very powerful reminder our talk, our discussion, our conversation that both operational excellence and diversity, equity, and inclusion are not about just processes and slogans, are about people working in sync, people communicating. And when inclusion and excellence meet, readiness follows. Thank you, Oana and Joseph, and everyone who joined us live or who will join us on replay. Don't miss my next LinkedIn Live on November the 10th from 5 to 6 p.m. Central European Time, when I'll be joined by Sue Knight, NLP Master Trainer, International Consultant, Coach, and author of NLP at Work. Our topic will be leadership from the edge, thriving in paradox. Until then, stay curious, stay connected, and keep leading with purpose. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you for having me.